Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and this will be an intro to the review that will follow. It will cover chapters 1 through 3, and hopefully this will be of some assistance to you as you cover the material for your exam on Tuesday. Your exam will be multiple choice in format, approximately 50 questions, 40 to 50 questions. So it won't be that grueling of an exam where you have to worry about finishing on time, because there will be more than enough time for you to finish the questions that I have arranged for you. So what will happen is this video that will follow, which has previously been shot, and you'll notice because I'm wearing something different and I'm in a different place, will cover the material in pretty good detail, a lot more detail than what I was able to cover in class. So that's why I use these videos as a complement to help you fill in some of the gaps that we may have had during our adjustment period in the first month of class. So this book, which I asked the class if you have it, where you are in the process of getting the book. This is where the book becomes important. Now, I don't say that you should only read the book just before the exams. You should be reading along and reading preferably before any material is covered. What I suggest to students is that the slides that I have uploaded, you can use those to kind of expose yourself to the material. You can skim through those, and then when you read the book, all of those things will become a lot more familiar to you, and it's easier to synthesize and comprehend the information that way. But there is no substitute of reading this book. We're not in the era yet where you can sit down in a chair and it can plug a jack into your head and upload some information. We're not quite there yet. I think, in my opinion, we're going to be there in probably 20 years from now, where you can sit down and somebody can upload a degree into your head. I don't know. I'm just being partly facetious, but certainly this information will take some time for you to get through. And so you don't want to wait until Sunday night and start studying, because things will become a lot more frenetic as the week starts and you have other things that you have to do. So you want to make sure that you get a head start on it. And also, before the exam, the night before the exam, you want to make sure you're well rested. You get some rest, and that you're not up studying till 3 in the morning, because that's generally not a good formula for success. When you're going through this material, apart from the slides that you'll look at, make sure you pay attention to the terms that are in bold here. These are important terms. And essentially they're concepts that are defined. And it's just good to have those as a part of your lexicon, so that those key words, when you see them in questions, it's easier to kind of understand the gist of what the question is asking. Also, look at some of the tables. We've already gone through a lot of this material, the 4 Ps. We talked about the idea of exchange, which is what the essence of a market is, an exchange between what? Buyers and sellers. So we've gone through that. And of course, the buyer is seeking value. This idea that the company provides a value proposition or a promise that it will deliver value based upon your needs and wants. So we have value, which is sought by the consumer, and we have a value proposition which is offered by the company to encourage you to buy the product. And that can be anything like durability, quality, customization, and have something custom made, which is obviously an incentive, price, quantity. If you buy a certain quantity, maybe you get discounts. So there are all kinds of value propositions that companies offer to encourage you to buy that product. So we've gone through all this. We've gone through supply and demand. We've done a little bit of basic economics. Value is kind of a big buzzword nowadays, that it's not only that you're trying to sell someone a product at a low price because it costs less. You can have a product that is cheap but still does not provide you with the value. And so value is kind of the big thing now. And many of the marketing relationships that we find now are between the buyer and seller are going to be that which provides a much more defined experience for the consumer. So this idea of customer relationship management, or CRM, is very important these days, and it entails the company compiling data on a consumer so they can target specifically what it is that customer needs or wants. So CRM is what companies are striving for when they amass mounds of data on consumers, knowingly or unknowingly. These chapters are not very difficult to read, but they're dense. They're very dense, and they're wordy, and to some degree they may be a bit it may be a bit overwhelming, even though it's not very difficult to understand. Let me talk a bit about where we're going in the class. On the syllabus that I have given you, since having disseminated the syllabus, there have been a couple of changes made in terms of just some mistakes. The self-branding project will be due on the 3rd, which is a Thursday, and the self-branding project is going to be one of 2 individual exercises. Originally, I had us doing 1 individual exercise and 2 small group exercises, but I've changed that to 2 individual and 1 small group exercise, and then we have a major group exercise at the end, which is the semester project. So if we look at the syllabus, and I've also made sure I corrected the office hours. I have extended my office hours. On Wednesday, I've added 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you'd like to come at that time, then I'll be here as well. So here we are. It is, well, today is the 21st. It's a Saturday. But on the 24th, we'll have our first exam, and chapters 1 through 3. So make sure you bring a pencil, because it will be in multiple choice format, and also we'll use a Scantron. And if you erase, you want to make sure that you get rid of all the lead and graphite so that the machine doesn't pick it up. I don't grade these by hand. I have to carry them over to another the testing center, and then they run them through a machine, and then I go pick them up later in the day. So we have the self-branding project, again, as you can see, due on October 3rd, and the chapters are 1, 2, 3 for the first exam. And then on Thursday, we will begin talking about market research, chapter 4. So make sure you keep pace, read ahead, go through the slides. I have uploaded all 3 chapters, the slides of all 3 chapters, so make sure you review those. And those are things that you can look at on the go. It's kind of like flashcards that people used to use to kind of drill themselves and get the concepts memorized. Not saying that's always a good idea, because memorization has its drawbacks as well. But make sure that if you go through the slides and then you go read the chapters, you'll have that reinforcement. you'll have that comprehension, and then when you get to the exam, many of these concepts will come to you right away, and you won't have to search in your memory bank to pull them out. Okay, so what will follow is the presentation of the 3 chapters, a review, and if you have any questions, you can send me an email, and you always have my office hours if you want to see me in person. Sometimes it's a little easier to communicate in person. You can get all your issues out of the way as opposed to going back and forth via email. And I think it's sometimes it's good to have a face-to-face. You can kind of read the you can read someone's thoughts a little better when you sit down before them and discuss whatever it is that you have an issue with. Okay, so in this video there will be points at which you can take a break, and you can always stop the video and watch it in parts, so you can watch the whole thing. Hopefully it will be helpful to you, and I'm hoping also that the class will do as well as I expect them to do. Okay, so again, study hard, rest well before the exam, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Okay, bye. All textbooks, marketing textbooks, will have a definition of marketing, particularly the principles books. And marketing is, I believe, is misunderstood by many, because we kind of think of it as advertising. Well, advertising is part of marketing, but they're not synonymous. Marketing is a lot of things. It is the creation of ideas. It is a communication of those ideas. It is delivering value, and it is about exchanges. In this case, between buyers and sellers. And you get into the whole economics about supply and demand and price and quantity and all of that. And that comes much later in the book, but certainly you all have an idea by being consumers that you will know those concepts very well. And one of the words in marketing that you will hear quite a bit is this idea of value. Now, we buy things with the idea that we are deriving value from whatever it is, good or service that we're buying, and getting utility from that product or service. And so you have this idea of satisfaction, satisfying needs and wants, which drives demand and also drives supply. So you have all of these different concepts that are certainly intertwined and makes for a very fascinating market dynamics. We talked about this in the first week of class, the 4 Ps. And you all know this very well now. Product, place or distribution, promotion, and price. So you have the 4 Ps. There are other models where you have 5 Ps, you have 7 Ps, but the baseline is the 4P model, and that 4P model has stood the test of time, and it is a pretty good measurement of how we treat products and how they're adapted in certain markets. So let's look at this idea of value. We're offering value. I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, we have a product, and we offer a value proposition. So what is a value proposition? A value proposition is defined as a marketplace offering that fairly and accurately sums up the value that would be realized if the good or service is purchased. Which means if you're an entrepreneur and you have a product, you have promotion. And in that promotion, you're offering your customer value. You're offering them the potential to utilize that product and derive value from that product or service. It can be a service as well. So you're offering a value proposition. If you buy this product, this is the benefit you will derive if you buy it. So let's take an example. Let's say that I'm in my home office now, and let's say I need to put up a bookshelf on the wall. I have a bookcase over here, but let's say I need to put up a bookshelf. So how do we put up a large bookshelf? We probably need some screws and some bolts to fasten it up and on the wall so that it doesn't fall down, right? So the question is, what tools do I need to put the bookshelf on the wall? I've gone to Home Depot, I've purchased the bookshelf, but I need to figure out how to make a hole in the wall. Now I could possibly use a screwdriver and a hammer that I have at home and punch a hole in the wall, right? And if you're anything like I was, and children are when they're small, you figure out all kinds of ways to punch holes in the wall with all kinds of objects. And you can do that, but that's not really the type of hole you want in the wall to put up a bookshelf. You need one that's very nice and precise, right? So what do? I'm at Home Depot, and I go to the section that have the power drills, right? That's the appropriate tool to put that hole in the wall. Again, I could use a screwdriver, I could use any other object to stick a hole in the wall, but if I put the screw in and the hole isn't precise, then that bookshelf may come down, may fall down with the rest of the books and everything else that's on top of it. So I go to the power tools section and I look at all the brands. I look at Craftsman, Bosch, Ryobi, DeWalt, Skil, Black & Decker. All of them are offering me a value proposition, and I've seen commercials on TV about all of these different brands, and they all offer me a value proposition for drilling that hole that I need to put the bookshelf up. So I buy one of them, and I get home, I power it up or I plug it in, and I drill my holes in the wall, and I put the bolts in, and I put the bookcase on the wall. I put books up, I put other items up, and it's sturdy, it stays up. And I'm happy, right? So what utility did I receive from the tools? Well, the utility was that I was able to put that bookshelf up, and it was a sturdy, it's in a situation where I know that it won't come down. So I'm satisfied. So in essence, what did you buy? What did you buy? That's a question that I asked you. What did you actually buy? I think I said it in class. That may have taken you aback. But what you really bought was the hole in the wall. That's what you bought. That's what you paid money for. You paid money for that hole in the wall, or those holes in the wall. Those holes in the wall gave you value because you were able to put the bookshelf up. So it's interesting how we look at products. We may think that, oh, I'm buying a Craftsman power drill, good quality. Yes, that's the product you're buying, but the utility is what you're after. So that's the idea of value proposition, the idea that you are offering a benefit and that you derive utility from that product and derive the benefit from that product in turn. So value obviously is extremely an important concept, one that we may not always think about, but certainly it's one that we face every time we buy something. So here's a question. Marketing activities play a major role in the creation of blank, which means that a product provides benefits when it's used. Would that be optimization, utility, synergy, functionality, or empathy? So the answer would be utility, obviously. So the creation of utility, which means that a product provides benefits when it is used. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So here's this idea of value again. Value for customers, value for sellers. So the idea is that we have customers. I'm a seller. That customer has needs and wants, and I want to satisfy those needs and wants. I realize there is a demand and I have the supply. And you all understand economics, you have that supply and demand curve, and price and quantity fluctuate depending on the market actors. But in this market here, you have buyer and the seller. You have an exchange, as the definition stated earlier. We saw the definition. You have an exchange taking place. And the buyer in this case is exchanging money for goods or services, and ultimately that buyer will provide feedback to the seller. They may even provide feedback to the seller even before they buy it. They might say it's too expensive, or I don't like the product because of it doesn't have this feature. And then that seller would then go back into that supply chain and figure out what they need to do to improve the product based upon the feedback they got. Then information goes to the buyer, perhaps to say we have an upgraded model, we have a better quality model that would suit the needs that you were talking about before. So you have this cycle that takes place between the buyer and the seller. Feedback, information, and that cycle continues. And obviously, you would want this exchange to continue such that the buyer is satisfied and the seller is also satisfied. So here's the value chain. Now in your book, there's actually a value chain that's illustrated, and it looks different from this chain here. If you look on page 20, you will see at the top Apple's value chain. And you'll notice it looks different from this value chain that I have up on the screen. You'll see at the top you have firm infrastructure, HR management, technology, procurement. You have all these activities that are involved in this chain of events. Inbound logistics means those materials are coming in. Operations means those products are being made. Outbound logistics means that's the distribution. The products are going out the door. They're being distributed to retailers, wholesalers, or directly to consumers. You have the marketing and sales activities. You have the customer service at the end, and hopefully that results in a margin as well. And in margin, obviously, we mean a profitable venture or profitable exchange. So this is the idea of value that we're trying to create through these activities. And at the end, hopefully both sides will be satisfied in terms of the product they get, and also satisfied as a result of the margins that they get from selling the product. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about with regard to Chapter 1. I want to move on to Chapter 2. And if you have, again, if you need to stop the video and take a break, by all means, please do so. But I'm going to move on to Chapter 2, Global, Ethical, and Sustainable Marketing. So this idea of world trade is very interesting because trade has been conducted for thousands of years. And in the 15th century, you had countries that were setting sail to the seas to find the new world. They had these trading routes where they would go and they would barter. That was the mercantilist era. But things kind of moved on from that into a more kind of an industrial society. But there were a couple of wars that interrupted this idea of the industrial age. So you had two world wars, World War I, which was the beginning part of the 1900s, and then toward the middle of the 1900s you had World War II, which was 1939 to 1945. And after that time, the entire system, global economic system, was shattered, was destroyed, and had to be rebuilt. So there were a number of organizations that were created to help rebuild this global economic system. Most notably, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, known as the GATT. So in 1947, the GATT was created and served as the referee, trade referee of countries that were in this global trading system. In 1995, that organization then became the World Trade Organization, and it added a number of different elements, such as intellectual property. It looked at things such as agricultural subsidies. It looked at other aspects of trade that had developed over time and had rendered the GATT outdated. So since 1995, we've had the World Trade Organization, which is the World Trade Referee. But after World War II, you had a lot of regional groups that surfaced, like the European Union, the EU, the OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is an oil cartel of oil-producing nations. You had the NAFTA, which Donald Trump wants to renegotiate. The North American Free Trade Agreement. You have the ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and you have many others. These are just four that I put up, but there are many others. And the idea behind these regional groups was to develop some cohesion in a regional formation such that it can compete with other trading blocs. So the EU is comprised of about almost 30 nations, and obviously European nations. And they also have included a currency, the euro, which was launched in the early 2000s, which was supposed to be the counterweight to the US dollar. You have the OPEC, which is the countries that produce most of the petroleum. They regulate oil prices. And they're not all Arab nations. They're not all nations in the Middle East. Indonesia is also a member. Venezuela is a member. Nigeria is also a member of OPEC. And they regulate the oil prices. And each member of OPEC has a quota of oil that they produce per year. And they're not to go over quota because you'll create an oil glut and drive down oil prices. You have NAFTA, which is Canada, US, and Mexico, that form a free trade area such that you don't have the borders or the tariffs that are north of our border and south of our border. So it's an entire free trade zone. Then you have ASEAN, which is a group of Asian nations that at the time the organization was created, they were fast-growing nations that needed to come together as a counterweight to the other regional powers, and thus you have a number of countries that have developed over time, such as South Korea. Countries like that have really developed a very intricate economic output system. You look at companies like Samsung, and that's a very powerful company that comes out of South Korea. You have others. Hyundai is another South Korean brand that you may know. But there's also something that happened in the early 2000s, the rise of China. And you watched a video that was called China Rising. And we saw this as this large country of over 1 billion people, the middle class growing, and all these mega cities popping up. Mega cities meaning these cities that are over 1 million people. And I think China might have 7 or 10 of these cities over 1 million. And you have this migration, people from the countryside going into the city, creating this explosion of population in the urban areas. And I actually saw that when I was in China in 2008. So China was closed for several decades until they were able to figure out what their direction was. 1979, Deng Xiaoping decided that he was going to open China up to these economic interests. And then in 2001, they joined, I think it was 2001, 2002, they joined the World Trade Organization. And before you knew it, they were on the heels of not only the US, but also all the European nations and Japan. China had arrived, and they were already in the rearview mirror of these powerful countries, such that now they have passed as the #1 exporter of merchandise to the world. And most of the products that you're seeing when you go to Target and you go to Walmart, these products are made out of China, and they're made very cheaply. And thus you have this explosion of activity in China. And also this country has a very large trade deficit against China because of that, the imports. This has led to the rise of protectionism. So what is protectionism? Is now these countries are now trying to protect their borders from China. China is dumping these cheap products into these countries, and now you have countries saying we have to protect our local producers because we're being priced out of the market. So there are a number of ways to protect your market. You can apply sanctions. You can threaten a country and say, if you don't do this, then we will do that. We will apply sanctions. We will limit your trade. We will even assess quotas. We will assess quotas, which means a limitation to what products that they can bring in. We will slap tariffs on your products. And President Trump, we will renegotiate agreements and see to it that we're getting a better deal from the trade arrangement that currently exists. You also have protectionism also in terms of labor. This idea of labor coming across the border, immigration restrictions, the idea that immigrants are taking certain jobs away from the local population, which is an issue not only you find in the US, but also in Europe. So you have this whole right-wing euphoria in certain parts of the world that want to limit immigration. So these are some very interesting times that we live in. So this question here. In February 2000, the U.S. imposed a tax on imported steel in an effort to protect about 5,000 jobs. Case in point. Another name for this levy tax is an or embargo, gray tax, tariff, import quota, boycott. So obviously it would be tariff, which is a levy tax. And these tariffs come in different forms. Sometimes there are specific tariffs. Say if you're importing a certain product, it's 10%. It's a 10% tariff. If you're importing an agricultural product like oranges, that may have a certain tariff rate. If you're importing orange juice, that may have a different tariff rate because it is a processed good as opposed to an agricultural good. You have tariffs in terms of size. You may have tariffs in terms of quantity. So you have all of these different types of tariffs that are assessed, and some of it is to protect local producers that may also be in the market producing that same product. So here are the trade flows. You look at the activity in Asia or with Asia, that North America, which includes Canada, it includes Mexico and the US, import to the tune of almost $1 trillion worth of imports. In North America, only basically 500 billion goes out in terms of exports. You look at some of the other regions, Europe, very active trading partner, and to a lesser degree, South and Central America. And to the others, look at the Middle East. Most of those imports coming in would be petroleum products. And this country, the US, has a deficit with a number of these different regions. And part of it is because of prosperity, because of the size of the consumer market, and because of the relative wealth. So here you have the headline that China surpasses the US as the world's largest trading nation. And it has a subheading, Beijing describes 2013 figures as a landmark milestone as annual trade in goods passes the 4 trillion mark for the very first time. So this was 2013 that China eclipsed the US as now the world leader in trade. So let's say, for example, you're an entrepreneur and you're seeking to go abroad. You have heard, and let's use China as an example, you have heard that there's a market in China for the product that you're making or that you have made. Now, there are a number of issues here. First, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to manage your internal resources of your company. So that means your marketing effort, your marketing budget, your finances, your human resources, your technology, all of those things you have to manage internally in that company. Many of the decisions you make will be affected by the domestic environment, meaning the laws that are put in place by the US government, the regulations, the economics, the financing that you're able to get for your business, the overall environment in terms of sales, in terms of your consumer market, and also the technology that you have at your expense to make some changes and improvements in order to be competitive in the market. So that's the domestic environment. But let's say you decide that you're going to go abroad, you're going into another country, and you need to have a different approach. If you look at this slide, you'll see these factors, which in global business I call them uncontrollable factors, but these would be external factors that you have to deal with. A country's political legal environment, their social cultural environment, their competitive environment, and their economic environment. And as you can see in the bubbles, it gives you an idea of how many details that you have to have your finger on in terms of the finger on the pulse in order to kind of gauge the market. So I mentioned political legal as one of the factors. Before you go abroad, you have to think about the environment that is the host country hosting your business. And you look at the business environment in terms of transparency. How transparent is it to do business in that country? Can I get through the business process without having delays, without having uncertainties about guarantees, about whether contracts are valid, about whether I have a resource to go to if something should go wrong? about whether my products are protected by the government if someone tries to steal my invention, or if I'm doing business there, is it popular? Is it common for me to give a bribe? So you have this BPI Index, which is a measurement of the extent to which a country is more likely to operate when bribes are being given or received. And so you look at this chart, and this chart basically tells you that the higher your BPI score, the more transparent your society is, and the less likely it is to succumb to the ideas of bribery. So this is from Transparency International. This is page 60. So you see the Netherlands and Switzerland are at the top in terms of business being transparent. Belgium, Germany, the US is top 10, and then you have other countries following. And then you have the countries that are below that perhaps things are a little more difficult to get things done. However, I may add that we have to sometimes look at this very closely, because bribery is one aspect of corruption. Now, corruption can take place in many forms, not just by you giving money, but by you giving favors to someone else, by you giving advantages to someone else. So these are also factors that need to come into play when you're assessing doing business in a foreign environment. You see this game that is often played in the meme on the right-hand side. If you got arrested for bribery, couldn't you just bribe your way out? Well, that might be the mindset of somebody who often engages in bribery. I can just bribe my way out. But in America, there is a law against accepting and giving bribes, and it's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and that was passed in 1977, and it covers essentially everything. That law or act is about a paragraph long, and it covers maybe closer to a page long, and it covers everything. So those are issues that have been covered, and frankly, it is to protect the American who's doing business abroad, and it's protecting the government. So the government can say, hey, this law is on the books. This person went over there, they gave a bribe, they got caught, they're in somebody's jail, we told them, here's this act that's on the books. So you have these types of issues as well. As tempting as it may be to get that $2 million contract, and they start speaking in this coded language about you giving money under the table, don't do it. That's my advice. Now, there are very creative ways that some people may not give money, they may give other things, and it's hard to trace some of those favors that are given. But certainly, you run a risk of being exposed in terms of those dealings, and so that's probably one of the things that you have to be cautious of. Also, be cautious of shady characters when you're abroad. You get into joint ventures and strategic alliances, and somebody steals your product, and they're nowhere to be seen. And it's really hard to get anywhere with a local government and trying to sue somebody for copyright infringement. It's just really difficult to do that. Even though your inventions, your patents are protected by international law, sometimes that local government does not have a very strong infrastructure to stop copyright infringement, trademark infringement, or also somebody stealing your patent. So when you go abroad, you have to decide on a few things. Should I keep my product standard, or should I adapt that product to suit the local market? You have many cases in which soft drink companies, fast food companies have gone to other countries and they have localized the product to suit that particular market. Some products are very standard, like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is a very standard product. You have a syrup, you have a certain compound that you mix together, and it creates this carbonated drink that's known the world over. And in some places, there are licenses for making small adaptations to the drink, but it's pretty much the same. I've actually had a chance to visit a couple plants. I visited in Swaziland, I visited the company that makes the syrup, which is a very intricate process. It's basically chemistry. You have to have a chemical, you have to have the right chemical makeup for that syrup to react in the right way with the carbonate that's mixed to make it carbonated. I also went to a bottling plant in Kenya where the product is actually mixed together and made and packaged and put into bottles, and the labels put on, and then they're put on a conveyor belt out on these crates and onto the truck. So I've been able to see the entire supply chain. But Coca-Cola is a fairly standardized product, but you also have some localization in other products where they may change some of the ingredients. I have a case that I do in global business called the China Gets a Taste of Cheeseless Cheetos. So in that case, in China, they made a Cheetos product without cheese because cheese was not the mainstay of the Chinese diet. So they made some adaptations. So you have three options. You can sell the same product, standard. You can modify it for a specific market or localize it, or you can develop a brand new product. Lots of times, many companies decide to make brand new products to suit that particular market because they feel that it's easier for me to make a new product than for me to re-engineer a product that I've already made. The standardized product will not cut it in that environment, so I need to develop a brand new product with new research, and that will make the consumers a lot happier as opposed to giving them something that is basically what do you call this? Cultural appropriation is the word that they're using nowadays. So the rule is the more commonality in factors, in the factors that I showed you a couple of slides ago, these factors, the more commonality that you have in these areas with the other country, the less adaptation you have to do. For example, if you're doing business in England, there are a lot of similarities in these factors with England, between the US and England. A lot of similarities in terms of the technological environment, the political legal, even though there are differences in the application of politics and law, the stability and the idea that there is a strong law that will protect a consumer and protect a business from liability, or protect the consumer from harm if in fact they have a bad product, or if they eat something and they get sick. So you have a particular environment that protects the consumer. And you have the others. So these factors, the more you have in common in these factors, the less adaptation. The less commonality, the more adaptation. So if you're in Bangladesh, if you're in, let's say, Malawi, if you're in Ecuador, Costa Rica, if you're in a country that has a number of differences, then perhaps you have to do more adaptation in the 4 Ps than if you went to a country that had more overlap in terms of the factors. So case in point, we saw a video on China rising, which this, by the way, is a picture that I took in China in 2008. You can see all the bicycles on the street. And you see the cars on the other side, but very interesting environment. And we saw this video, China Rising, of a case of Walmart going into China and some of the changes that they have to make. I will play this video, and what I'll do is, if you don't want to watch the video, you can go to the point in the video that will pick up where I left off. And if you want to watch it again, then you can do so. But I'm going to play this video and give you the opportunity, because it's not a video that I have available on YouTube. So this is the only way that I will be able to show it to you. So hopefully this will suffice. So this is the video, and I'll kind of cue it up so you can watch it. And I'm going to also supply the point at which you can fast forward if you'd like to. So here we go.
Now, another in our series of reports on the rise of China as a global economic power. Tonight, a look at a vast market that appeals to many companies, the Chinese consumer. The NewsHour's economics correspondent, Paul Salmon of WGBH Boston, has the story.
Shanghai's trendy Bar Rouge, where the bartender mixes drinks with Vegas-like showmanship, and the customers are as cosmopolitan as the cocktails.
We live in a modern society now compared to 20 years ago, where China was completely, sold up, right? We have McDonald's and we have KFC and we have Pepsi and Coke. Of course, young people are going to love and enjoy these things, right?
After decades of cliches about a billion thirsts to quench, the Chinese global consumer, it would seem, is here at last, starting at the top.
I bought it in '91 and renovated it.
American Handel Lee, restaurateur, art dealer, Shanghai's first Armani franchisee. A typical global investor who's targeting Shanghai's high-end shoppers.
We're going for the top 5%.
And how many people is that?
Well, in Shanghai, according to our numbers, it's about 860,000 people.
There's almost 1 million people in Shanghai who can afford stuff like this?
Absolutely.
Now, even if that's not an extravagant estimate, it would still mean that 15 million people in Shanghai alone, and more than 1 billion Chinese in total, can't afford stuff like this. A Marni label outfit around $2,000, twice the average Chinese annual income. But the point is, it seems to be no problem for mainland fashionistas. Chinese consumers now scoop up 12% of the world's luxury goods, mostly when they travel abroad, compared to 17% by U.S. consumers. And yet not long ago, almost everyone in China dressed exactly the same.
The blue Mao suit to Marni. Now, it's quite a journey.
Lee's women's boutique, where even the dressing rooms are theatrically upscale. A barbershop where Celine Dion serenades the clientele. This is how China's top 5% can afford to shop. The next 30% can go to Walmart. Because it's mainly reachable by car, and there are still only 10 million cars here, about the number the U.S. had around 1930, Walmart caters to China's upper middle class, those who average about $10,000 a year, which goes roughly as far as $40,000 in the U.S. Fewer than 30% of Chinese may actually earn at this level. We remind you, amidst all the city glitz, that more than half the population is still rural, but less than 25% of all Chinese is still more than the entire population of the United States. Nearly identical to its U.S. prototype, with employee enthusiasm matching anything back home, Walmart has 48 stores in China. Will put up a dozen more before the year is out. At the chain's newest supercenter in Beijing, the head of Walmart Asia, Joe Hatfield, explained how the world's largest corporation views its fastest growing market.
It's the one place in the world that you could recreate Walmart all over again.
Why?
Because of the population base and the growth and the income levels.
To see how Chinese consumers increasingly go west, just look at cosmetics.
We started out with 4 foot of skincare. Today it's 20 feet. Today we don't have deodorants, but someday down the road we will have deodorants in China. 5 years ago, perfumes were not a big business here, but if you look today, it's an emerging market.
Even sales of dairy products are booming, though most Chinese are lactose intolerant.
If you came to Shanghai or Beijing 4 or 5 years ago, you would have seen about 25% of what you're seeing today. This market has just exploded.
Exploded may be apt, given the symptoms of lactose intolerance and a new issue in China, eating too much in general.
They drink more milk, they eat more bread and snack crackers, and they eat more meat in their diet. There's a lot less bicycles, so that takes away from the exercise side of it, so the size of people are getting larger. So what's that tell you? Exercise equipment's getting good, exercise wear, jogging outfits, and at some point we'll have Slim Fast and all those type of products.
Slim Fast in China. But while Walmart may be spurring Western-style overconsumption for those relatively few at the top, its style of merchandising may have benefits here. Criticized in America as leading a race to the bottom, Walmart in China could be leading a race in the opposite direction.
First, the price is good. Second, the environment is good.
They wear a smile on their face. They give us directions and help us to find the things we need very efficiently.
This supermarket is modern and cool.
It's also clean. Its meat section, for instance, features workers in masks to guard against disease.
It evolved a couple years ago when we had SARS, and there's a lot of focus been given to food safety and cleanliness and sanitation, and the customers appreciate it.
So apparently does the Chinese government. Hygiene has long been an afterthought for Chinese businesses. Grocers, for example, still use fans to scatter flies. So the government can point to Walmart as a model of modernization.
They hold us to a higher standard than others and to set the expectations for others to follow.
Cleanliness, convenience, and opportunity for today's workers and those of tomorrow.
In a store like this where we'll hire 500 to 550 associates with opportunities to grow. When I joined the company, I started out as an assistant manager and a store manager. How would I have ever dreamed 30 years ago I would be doing what I'm doing today? And I think we give tens of 15,000 people each year those opportunities to grow.
Before, as peasants, all we faced every day was fields and vegetables. Now I get information from all sides and I can develop myself. That's the difference.
My goal is to become district manager in 1 year and manager of all Walmart in 5 years.
Do you hope to be Joe Hatfield someday?
I'd like to be his boss.
There's the same can-do spirit in Walmart's book section, where customers take their inspiration from the likes of Dale Carnegie and his How to Win Friends and Influence People. A made-in-America philosophy in a store whose goods are almost all made in China. Still, as with so much foreign investment here, the vast majority of the poor are out of the picture. And Walmart's low-price policy forces Chinese suppliers, says labor activist Han Dongfang, to treat their workers badly.
They make these subcontractors compete with each other, against each other, and Walmart just sit here and see these people biting against each other, and they're bleeding, and then they get the lowest price. It's based on exploitation of Chinese workers.
Meanwhile, Walmart itself has reportedly yet to turn a profit in China. The underground parking garage in Beijing was conspicuously empty. Plus, there are regulatory headaches galore to undermine the efficiencies of Walmart's famed centralized distribution system.
We have to buy produce locally from the countryside. We have to buy liquor locally. We have to buy tobacco locally.
A mile away, Walmart's local competition, the giant Chinese chain Walmart, takes a more traditional approach to wooing the urban consumer. Walmart subcontracts to local services, like this barbershop, and fills its supermarket settings with traditional Chinese sights and sounds. What does he say?
That's the price. That's the price.
Oh, he's shouting out the price.
Yeah, Chinese people still, we like this kind of atmosphere. It makes people feel very excited.
And, says Walmart executive Su Ying, so does the sale of a kilo of eggs, especially popular with older consumers, 11 eggs for 30 cents, and the bargain tables. Most items a dime, top price 60 cents. She put that one back and is looking at the other
just
one.
compare the other, see if there's any small problem, check the quality. From the face, you can see they're very happy.
Here too, though, global marketing is having an impact on some of the world's pickiest shoppers. Do you go to Walmart and see what they're doing? Do you check them out?
Well, we do. We could also send our staff there and then compete. If we are regarded as a competitor, direct competitor of Walmart, that means we are approaching that level, the world-class company level.
So, do Chinese consumers want to become westernized? No, says ad man Tom Doctoroff, head of J. Walter Thompson's Shanghai office. They want to become modern while remaining emphatically Chinese.
Chinese believe fundamentally in the superiority of the Chinese worldview. The one thing that has unified China, despite wars, despite emperors falling and dynasties rising, is the Chinese worldview and a belief in it as almost a religion. It's almost spiritual cohesion. So people don't want to become Western. People think that Western is a dead end. What they want to be is international. What they want to be is modern.
So Doctoroff puts a Confucian spin on, for instance, his Nike ads in China. They seem to stress Western individualism, but it's never outside the group.
Individualism in China, it's the illusion, okay, of being different, of having a better, smarter, cleverer way, but it always has to remain understated within the context of a social bears of a Confucian society. One thing that is interesting about Chinese youth is they're very ambitious. They want to show up in front of their peers, but because it's not truly an individualist culture, they show off but in an understated way. So the tone and the manner of these is very quiet, and then the joy and the showing off and the peer endorsement happens. So Chinese don't want to define themselves independent of society. They want to, as individuals, climb up a very regimented social hierarchy.
Doctoroff applied the same insight in a Chinese diamond ad.
This is a fundamentally different ad than what you'd see in the West. A diamond is forever. In the West, it's really about sex. This is really a commercial, not about romance, but about commitment. The man ties a red string to the woman's finger. The Chinese have a belief that two people, because of fate, are born with a red string attached to their intended, the person they're meant to be with.
As for you PBS viewers who think fewer ads in general might not be a bad thing,
advertising is about profit, and profit is good for capitalism, and capitalism is making China move forward.
It's an argument that upscale young Chinese have now begun to buy.
We've always heard that Chinese like to save, not spend money.
Mm-hmm.
That true of your parents?
Very much so.
And you?
I spend ahead of my earnings.
You spend ahead of your earnings?
Yeah.
Is that true of your friends as well?
I think so. It's true of all young people.
Millions upon millions of new Chinese consumers then, globalizing in their own way at a dizzying pace. Yes, they're a tiny fraction of the total. More than 1 billion Chinese could never afford a drink here. But at the rate China has been changing, it could become, with its own peculiar twists, the world's largest market someday, perhaps someday soon.
Paul's next report will look at the question of Mao's mixed legacy in a new China. For more on this series, or to sign up for a podcast that automatically downloads audio versions of these reports, visit the online news hour at pbs.org.
So there you have it. You have this rising giant in the global economic sector, and my advice, I always advise my students about study abroad. If you can get an opportunity in China, you should grab it. If you can get that experience a semester, a year over in China, learn some Mandarin, learn the business environment. It'll be worth its weight in gold. And it's also a very interesting place to visit. So if you have that opportunity, I would certainly recommend it. So in that video, you saw a number of things. You saw Walmart making adaptations. They talked about cosmetics. They talked about dairy products. The whole idea of the middle class, spending more, people coming in from the countryside, a whole lot of dynamics that are happening in China. China is changing right before our eyes, and it is certainly a superpower. Now, regardless of what anybody may say about the pecking order, China is an economic superpower. And I would say is certainly a credible rival as it relates to the United States and the European Union. All right, so let's. I'm going to move from chapter 2 and begin talking briefly about chapter 3. I'm almost out of time. This class is 75 minutes, and we're about at that time. So I'll basically give an overview, some of the things that we have mentioned before. The 3 levels of planning: strategic planning, which is long-term, done by top-level management; functional planning, which is tactical. Here you're a middle manager and you're able to come up with tactics of how things work. The operational planning is supervisory manager, make sure that things get done. So you have the strategic, long-term; functional, which is tactical; operational, which is let's get it done and let's see progress being made. And so in strategic planning, you can see all the things that we talked about with respect to FAMU in the beginning. And we kind of did a case study on FAMU. There you can see this. Actually, I have a video. I'm not going to play this, but this was at the convocation, last homecoming. And during class, if you want me to play it, I can play it. It's a very nice video, but for the sake of time, I'll just pass by this. So again, you have the mission statement, which I've shown in class a couple of times. The SWOT analysis we did in class. We looked at the strengths and weaknesses. We came up with a lot of weaknesses, which we all know. Perhaps some opportunities of recruiting and widening our horizons in terms of where we get students, and some threats. And one that I mentioned was, of course, the political apparatuses has been an issue with cutting funding that FAMU has in terms of its budget. The idea of setting the objectives for the organization. You also have strategic business units. So for example, you have the different schools under FAMU, and each of those entities have their own targets. For recruitment, they have their own targets for raising funds. They have their own targets for their relationships, external relationships with perhaps corporate sponsors and donors. But they have to also be in line with the overall mission of the institution. So what is the business portfolio that we talk about in chapter 3? What does FAMU offer? FAMU offer, you probably say, well, they offer degrees. Okay, yes, that's the product or service. Is it a product or service? But that's what we offer. We offer a number of degree programs. And the value proposition is that if you get a degree from FAMU, then you get X, Y, and Z. What do you get? You get access perhaps to a better lifestyle or a successful lifestyle. We will give you at FAMU and HBCU, we will give you a nurturing environment. You all said that in the strengths, right? All of the strengths that you mentioned, that you all mentioned in class, were perhaps value propositions that we touted ourselves on when we recruited you. So you have all these value propositions, but finally, the idea that we're offering a degree program which will lead you to greater prosperity is ultimately what a student looks for. They look for that, a good experience, and they look for, at the end, the potential of being successful, whether it's being an entrepreneur, whether it's being an executive, or whether it's just being someone who works in a nonprofit organization or who works in government. I mean, these are all paths that FAMUans can take. When I was in South Africa, I met the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, who was a FAMU grad. And he entertained us over at his residence. And when I went over there and I told him who I was, he had already looked up the other professors. He had already looked up the roster. And he gave me a big warm hug because he knew I was from FAMU, his alma mater. And so we've been able to do great things in many different fields. And then the growth strategies as far as President Robinson in terms of where he wants to take the university. And that's mapped out in our strategic plan. We also have market planning. How do we want to execute some of these strategies in terms of recruiting more students? What's the situation in terms of recruitment? How is it that we're now in fierce competition with students from other schools for African Americans, which is that's a real issue. And that's what the situation is. So we have to have marketing objectives. We have to have whether our enrollment, we want our enrollment to increase by 13,000. So we have to have marketing objectives to maybe increase our ad budget, increase our promotional budget, maybe have more emphasis on our digital platform. Marketing strategies for long term. Maybe marketing strategies could be in the form of enlisting more alumni to do more of the legwork. And these types of strategies, again, are long term, and you might not see immediate impact, but indeed those are strategies that need to be implemented in order to find success in your objectives. And then last but not least, the implementation of those strategies, and then to test to see if those strategies are working. So in these, you have strategic planning and you have planning within your particular market. So in terms of assessing what it is that you have in your portfolio, you look at something called the Boston Consulting Group, this matrix. And when you have products having a small share in a slow growth market, they are called A, dogs, B, cash cows, C, stars, D, question marks. And the answer is D, A for dogs, which means that if you have degrees that you're conferring, but you're not graduating any students, you have a small share, slow growth market, maybe the major that you've created is no longer viable or attractive. So then you get rid of that program, as we did. I mentioned to you that I was on a committee where we assessed all the degree programs at FAMU, and we made suggestions to the provost's office to make cuts, to make consolidations, and the like. And that was implemented some years back. And with some regret, we do not offer a degree program in foreign languages, which was something that we found that was not popular amongst the students, or we were not graduating those who had an interest in language degrees.